Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from MBS on the Sustainable Futures Report 2024. We're going to be joined by some guest speakers today, but mainly I'd like to thank our sponsor for this webinar, Crown Paints, for making this possible. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Today's webinar is going to last around an hour, and all attendees' microphones are muted to ensure audio quality. However, if you do have any questions and you want to ask those, please feel free to drop them in the questions box and we'll respond to you afterwards as a follow-up. I'm your host for today. My name's Lee Jones and I'm the Head of Sustainability at Big Factor Group. Guest speakers for today, I'm going to be joined by Sidonie Imler from Fosters & Partners, who's going to be giving you an overview of sustainability and the specification process, but in particular using the LETI guide, which is a fantastic resource for actually achieving sustainable outcomes and providing guidance to do that. We'll then be joined by Richard Bailey and Catherine Tormey from Crown Paints, who are going to be giving you a view from a manufacturer's perspective as a best-in-class operation set up for achieving sustainability as a manufacturer. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sidonie, who's our first guest speaker for today from Fosters & Partners. Sidonie, the floor's yours.
Thanks, Lee, and hello, everyone. My name is Sidonie Imler. I'm a partner at Foster & Partners in London, and I'll be talking about the LETI Low Embodied Carbon Specification Procurement Guide today. LETI, which stands for Low Energy Transformation Initiative, is a network of like-minded volunteers and professionals in the construction industry who got together in around 2017 to improve the carbon footprint within the built environment. Since then, a suite of interlinked documents on embodied carbon has been released over the last couple of years, 4 of which you can see here on this slide, like the LETI Embodied Carbon Primer, which came out in January 2020, Embodied Carbon Information Sheets, which came out in May 2021, and Industry Embodied Carbon Target Sheets in 2021 as well. In March 2023, we released the Specification and Procurement Guide. We found that there was a disconnect between good carbon intentions during the design process and what actually happens on site. And we realized that carbon needs to be addressed in the specification, linking document between the two, design and construction. This guide was written with industry engagement, taking into account many stakeholders along the way. And we divided it into 3 stages, the first stage of which was an industry-wide survey. The second stage were targeted interviews with manufacturers, clients, contractors. And the third stage were detailed case study interviews, which all informed this guide. The guide is structured into 6 chapters, which I'll be touching upon today. There'll be a little introduction. It introduces LETI, some definitions. There's a proposal of an embodied carbon reduction roadmap in chapter 2, which I'll be going into a bit more detail in a short while. The use of specifications to ensure low carbon procurement, which is after all our aim with this document. How to document embodied carbon within your documentation, and also some guidance on specifying and procuring low carbon materials, as well as an overview of the case studies at the end of the guide. Why did we write this guide? We thought that there was no clear route to compliance or indeed a roadmap with common strategies in place, which is why we got together and decided to provide guidance to the industry. It follows up on the LETI Embodied Carbon Primer, but to make sure that these embodied carbon limits that are set within the primer can actually be seen through onto site and delivered on site. Specification and procurement often throw up unexpected challenges, and the intent of this guide really is to help navigate past those challenges. It's aimed at construction professionals, architects, designers, clients, contractors, maybe even manufacturers, to help deliver low carbon project aspirations. The purpose is not to compare materials against each other and advise on which materials to use, but rather to optimize the way we specify materials. On the next slide, I'll be talking about what we call the Embodied Carbon Reduction Roadmap. We've mapped it against the RIBA stages 0 to 6, and we've identified 6 criteria that we thought were crucial in delivering low embodied carbon design. These 6 criteria are strategy, research and design, transparency, requirements, submittals, and at the end of the process, recording your information. Looking at the next slide, you'll see that the first criteria set against was strategy. And this is very early on, even stage 0 or stage 1. We believe that carbon needs to be addressed throughout all the stages, and it's very crucial to start early on, set your overall or element-specific embodied carbon limits right at the beginning, talk to your client, lock them into the client brief, start thinking about key delivery dates, and start to identify opportunities. Who's involved in this process? Well, definitely the client early on and the design team as soon as the design team is assembled. The second criteria we looked at was research and design, which is really crucial along this process. It's so important to choose appropriate materials, products, and components based on their performance and design requirements, but also carbon. And maybe this is a new dimension to some designers or architects, but we find it very important to think about that early on and to start consider whole life carbon and procurement impacts, as well as lifespan of materials. Start thinking about design for disassembly, reuse for later stages, fitness for purpose. Are there any lessons learned from previous projects that you might want to consider at this stage? So this is early on, this is stages 1 going into 2. Who's involved? The design team, manufacturers should be involved at this stage, ideally already contractors. If contractors are not on board, you might want to think about pre-contract service agreements to get info about their supply chains and make sure you design for the lowest carbon impact possible. And how do you do that? You can start documenting even at that stage your aspirations, maybe through stage report submissions, and also to start getting it into preliminary cost information. We all know that low embodied carbon is not an add-on at the end that you consider at maybe a tender stage. It is something that is informed throughout the design from the beginning and needs to be considered early on. Moving on into stages 2 to 4, transparency was a headline we thought about quite a lot. Transparency from manufacturers about their products and materials, but also seeking transparency from a designer's point of view. It's for the design team really to do the research throughout all stages and look for materials that maybe have an EPD type 3 verified independent EPD available, maybe a declare label, maybe cradle to cradle certification, and make choices on materials accordingly. Start to compare products, and also if you don't know the information, ask the manufacturer. I think there's a lot to be gained from communicating with manufacturers, which also then indicates a demand from the architects or the designer side, from the design team, for low carbon products and materials. And you can see we've dropped in here the first specification milestone, which might be your outline specification. So as early as maybe stage 2 or 3, whenever you're preparing your outline specifications, start to consider carbon and maybe start to add some carbon limits into these specifications as aspirations to be achieved along the way. Moving on, when we get towards tender documentation, it's really crucial to set your firm requirements and document them within your tender specifications and beyond. You need to provide criteria for the contractor to fulfill, but also start setting out limits and how to measure against them. Who's involved at this stage? All stakeholders really, the whole design team. If contractors are on board already, have these conversations with them, what's possible, what are their supply chains allowing, and then document it for tender and beyond. So this would affect, and you can see here, we've called it specifications, that could be your full tender specifications, but it could also be your employer's requirements if you're working on a design and build project. And then finally, moving on to side, RIBA stages 5 and 6, where submittals are crucial. You've documented your requirements in your tender specification, the contractual requirements are set out, but now it's down to the contractor to tell you what they're installing, what's through their submittals. So check the submittals by contractors against what was agreed and documented in your specifications previously. So the people involved, or the stakeholders involved at that stage, are the contractor and the contract administration team. And then finally, moving on to the final stage, RIBA stage 6, it's all about recording that data. Calculate your final embodied carbon project from the data submitted by the contractor, and start recording it to go into O&M manuals. So the facilities management teams get involved at this stage as well, and collect and share that data, ideally with a wider value chain to close the industry data gap. A lot of information is still required for everybody to make informed choices. So it's great for companies and contractors, designers to share the data and the findings they get on their projects. And of course, that then creates a feedback loop. So whatever findings you get at this recording stage, you can loop them back into your next project and close the carbon gap. At this point, you have still got the wider project team involved, the contractors, the client, and of course the F&M team, who will be required to take on this data and then continue beyond further life cycle stages. So the specifications involved at this stage would be record specifications or as-built type specifications, where all this data of the built project is recorded. So just showing all stages again, it looks linear here, but of course it isn't a linear process. There'll be lots of reiterations, but you can see here we identified, as I said, the stages 0 to 6 on the RIBA of the RIBA stages. The 6 main criteria to consider along your way: the specification submissions roughly dropped in where they might occur, and also we identified the main stakeholders at each stage. And finally, moving on to the final slide, you can see that the feedback loops are really crucial here. Like I said, it's not a linear process. There will be a lot of iteration, and you might have to check and recheck again, but it will inform future projects, as well as making sure that the carbon you design for in your project is delivered through on site. On the next couple of slides, I'll just be talking about specifications generally and how to get carbon requirements into these specifications. So why specifications? We all know specifications are contractual. They're part of the tender and the building contract set. So it's the ideal place to lock in your requirements. It's important to lock them in early, but not just your embodied carbon requirements or limits, but also any methods for implementation, any methods for checking to make sure your net zero ambitions are actually delivered upon on site. Specifications are really essential for a contractor to determine performance, quality, material, and workmanship requirements, as well as cost. But now we also have an additional element here, which is carbon. We've got the type of specification you prepare for depends on the building contract. It depends on the stage. I mentioned earlier outline specifications, full specifications, and record specifications as important milestones for recording carbon. But of course, it depends. Is it a traditional procurement route that the project will enter into, or is it a design and build, or is it any other type of contract? But we believe it can be implemented in any procurement form you may enter into. So just looking at two different types of specification here, we generally talk about performance-based specifications or prescriptive specifications. The choice of those depends on the procurement route. You might have a mix, or you might just go down one route, purely prescriptive or purely performance-based. They create different challenges. However, it's possible to implement your carbon aspirations in either form of specification. So say you're going down the prescriptive route, you can specify products or materials that have specific EPDs. It can be fixed at tender at that stage. There's less contractor input going down the traditional or the prescriptive procurement route. Maybe less room for a contractor to use their supply chain expertise. So in this case, you might, like I said earlier, start to consider pre-contract service agreements just to get info from that contractor supply chain to make sure you get the best carbon performance out of your products or materials. Performance-based, you might just set embodied carbon limits, and this might be an overall limit that you set for the building, or it might be element-specific limits, say, for instance, for cladding, and the contractor can try and achieve this in the best way their supply chains can provide. So the challenge here maybe is who keeps track of the overall carbon budget, and submittals will, of course, have to be verified and always calculated back against these originally set limits. The way to unlock all these carbon requirements on site are, of course, through sustainability submittals. We're all used to submittals as part of the verification process in specifications, but maybe not all of us are asking for sustainability submittals yet. Our aim at Leti is that sustainability submittals become a firm requirement within specifications. Um, Setting a submittal process and a verification process for embodied carbon within your specification, you might set general embodied carbon requirements in your A section or preliminaries, and this might include procedures on how to derive at these carbon values, overall carbon limits, tender requirements, and also starting to set roles within the carbon calculation requirements. Specific embodied carbon requirements can be anchored within your work sections. You could, for instance, set a performance within your individual work technical sections via embodied carbon limits, or you could ask for sustainability submittals in the form of EPDs for every product, maybe cradle to cradle certification, or if you're working in MEP, TM65 calculations. The challenge will be who is checking these submittals, and that might be something that not everybody's used to in the industry yet. Is it the contract administrator, or is it a specific embodied carbon lead? I think these kind of roles need to be agreed upon within the design team. So looking again at low embodied carbon procurement, it's really crucial that you include carbon in your specifications and in your tender requirements. Why specifications? Because they ensure continuity and they make requirements contractual, which is really important. Who's involved? It's a collaborative approach. Of course, the specification writer compiles all the data, but the whole design team will have to be involved. There might be a sustainability consultant. It's crucial to think about who's taking the lead on embodied carbon. Is it the lead consultant? Is it a sustainability consultant or a project manager? For sure, it's a collaborative approach, and everybody will need to feed in with their information and with their knowledge. When do you include it? It depends on the type of project and the client type, the contract the client wants to enter into with the contractor, and required outcomes. But our message is that as early as possible, start thinking about carbon, start locking it into your documentation as early as RIBA stage 1, preparation and brief. The next slide shows some key deliverables and when they may be locked in. Again, this is flexible and depends on the type of contract and the type of building. The client might have their own objectives already. The design team or the lead designer is there to advise. So you might want to include your carbon requirements within the client's brief to lock them in for the whole design team. But don't forget that embodied carbon needs to be designed out as well. So early activity amongst all stakeholders is key. Moving on, when you deliver site design reports along the stages, add a chapter on embodied carbon, stating carbon limits at this stage already, if possible, and start to present the right choices in your materials pages and in your visualizations. Often you may find yourself locked into early design choices that you then try and make work for carbon later on, which might be difficult. So start thinking about carbon when you design at your very early stages. This slide is just showing a few more options, which will go into more detail in our guide and you can read up upon. Things like embodied carbon management plans, material procurement plans, which are linked to cost with the QS, all of which can be locked into the specification as a requirement to be taken through after tender, but need to be thought about at early stages and started at early stages. Embodied carbon reports or embodied carbon compliance reports are very important on larger projects, and all these documents need to be continually revised along the design route. an embodied carbon tracker, for instance, is started as early as stage 3, which can then be revised during the design stages and then gets handed over to the contractor, who continues with that tracker all the way through to practical completion. One of the chapters within the guides includes what we call material guides. I'm just showing one here. It's an overview. So we've identified major materials, and this is not to give advice on which material to use, because that's always very project specific, locale specific, but it's generic info on best practice, specification, procurement, what to watch out for these individual materials, and who to communicate with, where to get your information from. It leads into then how to write an effective specification and how to lock in carbon requirements for these different materials, to then lead into successful procurement. It addresses the communication requirements along the route. And also it mentions, depending on the material, additional consideration, and gives some very generic information on specification clauses and how that could be included in the specification. And finally, at the end of the guide, you'll find some case studies. Just an overview. These case studies are designed to offer a view across the supply chain perspective. So we have views from contractors, from clients, from designers, from authorities. So it gives an overall view of a snapshot view of where we are with carbon procurement at the moment, and some best practice examples. Different procurement approaches have been considered in these case studies, and all of them have been mapped against our LETI carbon reduction roadmap stages. So you'll find the icons of those 6 criteria icons that I talked through earlier in the roadmap. You will find them in the case studies, highlighting where these items apply along the roadmap and how they've been achieved. It offers a direct practical observation of everybody, all the stakeholders involved in these projects. But bear in mind, it's a snapshot in time, and of course, the industry is moving very fast, and these are case studies from over a year ago, and hopefully the industry has improved since then. But these are great studies already to get a good idea of how low carbon development can be achieved. So thank you very much. Just to sum up, the Embodied Carbon Specification and Procurement Guide is available to download for free from the LETI webpage. You can see the address down here. It's www.leti.uk/specification. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this informative. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sidonie. So our second guest speaker for today, our guest speakers are Richard Bailey and Catherine Tormey from Crown Paints. Richard and Catherine, over to you.
And thank you, Lee, for that great introduction. Thank you. Now, Crown was founded over 200 years ago in 1777 and remains one of the largest paint manufacturers in the UK. We employ over 1,100 people across the manufacturing facilities in Darwin and Hull. And the Crown Decorating Centre network now has a total of 178 stores. Our mission is to help everyone paint their own possible. We believe every pot of paint is brimming with potential, and we want to put that in the hands of everyone. We are proud to be part of a global coatings company, Hempel, which has an annual turnover of 2.2 billion euros. Hempel is partly owned by the Hempel Foundation, a dedicated philanthropic organisation that strives to make a difference towards the world by 3 key areas: supporting biodiversity, empowering children to learn, and making coatings more efficient and sustainable. The foundation has invested millions of euros in each of these areas, and as part of the Hempel Group, a portion of our profit goes towards supporting these 3 great areas. Making a positive difference to people and the planet has long been in our DNA, but we know we can do even more. Our ambition is to be the leader in sustainable coatings. That's why we've launched Project Possible. Project Possible runs through our entire business and beyond. It's bold and it's ambitious, but those are words we're proud to live up to. Project Possible covers 5 key areas: sustainability, charity, community, education, and people and culture. For each of these, we have set ourselves ambitious goals, which we're already making progress towards. Firstly, let's take sustainability. By enabling our customers to make more sustainable choices, while scrutinizing the ones we make, we're going to reduce our impact on the environment. Sustainability is a primary driver for all product development and innovation. Kate will give you a deeper overview into this in the coming slides. But I'll quickly touch on the other areas as they're important parts of Project Possible. Charity, from fundraising and donating products to simply lending a helping hand, we're committed to making sure the positive power of paint reaches those who need it most. One of our primary goals this year is to raise £50,000 for our national charity, our charity partner, Alzheimer's Society. We're also funding patrons of the Blackburn and Darwen Youth Zone and have donated over £75,000 in the last 3 years. Communities. We're on a mission to support communities across the UK and Ireland by leading projects that help people get the best from their local places. Our goals include funding 50+ community glow-ups each year and investing in grassroots sports. In 2022 alone, we supported over 400 community groups and good causes, donating £60,000 worth of paint. Education, another key part of Project Possible. Nurturing the great generation of professional painters, decorators, and designers is something we're immensely passionate about. We deliver over 100 training programs to professional decorators, to architects and designers. We're also donating 10% of proceeds from the sale of our crafted range to support Quest and sponsor British craftspeople. And finally, people and culture. We're committed to building a safe and empowering working environment rich in possibility for all. We have a number of internal initiatives in place to support inclusivity and the opportunity within Crown. We're also members of an organisation to improve diverse recruitment, including Tent, which supports the hiring of refugees. I'm now going to hand over to Kate to take you through more detail on our environmental sustainability ambitions and achievements.
Thanks, Richard. We have some of the most ambitious environmental sustainability goals in the coatings industry, and these include becoming completely carbon neutral in our operations and achieving zero waste to landfill, both by 2026. And one of the biggest steps we've taken towards this goal is switching to 100% renewable energy for our operations. And to achieve this meant removing the use of all fossil fuels by installing a range of efficient heating solutions and generating our own on-site renewable electricity and decarbonising our company vehicle fleet. So some of the ways we've actually done this is installing 6 air source heat pumps at our whole manufacturing site, and this has reduced our natural gas consumption by 35%. And the programme's continuing, and this will continue across the year and will completely eliminate natural gas across both our Hull and Darwen sites. And in addition, we've converted 4 diesel-fuelled hot water pressure washers to hydro-treated vegetable oil, and this has saved another 90%. And we're also generating our own renewable electricity, and we've installed around 560 solar panels at our whole site, and we've got another 6 solar projects planned, which include another 600 panels at our Darwen site, and that will be done next year. And so far, the initiatives achieved an annual saving of nearly 145,000 kilowatt hours. So what does that mean? Well, that'll power a fridge for 333 years. And we're going to go even further. We're potentially going to save up to about 600,000 kilowatt hours per year by the end of 2025. So we're also taking a lead role in transitioning our petrol and diesel fleet to electric and hybrid vehicles, which is really exciting. When we evaluated the data from the Hempel Decorative business, we're forecast to reduce our traditional internal combustion engine vehicles from around 377 to just 18 by the end of 2025, and that's a massive reduction of over 95%. Another initiative we're doing, which is my personal favourite, is CAMBACK, and this was an industry first in the first recycling scheme, and that launched in 2013. And we accept both metal and plastic cans, and more importantly, we accept from any manufacturer. And we do that through our crown decorating centres and our warehouses. In 2023, we recycled a massive 1.4 million cans, and that was an increase of 155% compared to 2021. In addition to our operational sustainability, improving the environmental credentials of our products is a primary driver, and that's behind all the innovation we do. And this really feeds into our commitment to reducing our Scope 3 emissions by 50% by the end of 2030, and that's across the Hempel Group. We've undertaken extensive independent evaluation of our Scope 3 reduction activities, and this has led us to 3 priority areas. The first one being use less paint by providing longer lasting coating solutions. Increasing R&D into coatings that deliver the same technical performance but with a low carbon footprint, and also improve existing products by working with our product formulations and suppliers to phase out raw materials which have the greatest carbon footprint. And this takes us nicely onto our Clean Extreme range, which is a clear example of where we're putting these principles into practice. And already we can support specifications that require a clear demonstration of environmental impact. So Crown Trade Clean Extreme is a range of highly durable emulsion paints, and it offers best-in-class performance across opacity, durability, stain resistance, making them excellent across any commercial project. And within this range, we've got a number of specialist products from mold inhibiting to antibacterial properties. And one of the most recent products we did launch into the range was Crown Clean Extreme Clean Air. And this is the first highly durable emulsion with air purifying technology. And Clean Air works to neutralise formaldehyde in the atmosphere to improve air quality in the interior spaces, and it can remove as much as 45% of formaldehyde. It's also 99% solvent free and contains our Breathe Easy technology. And in addition to that, Clean Air's BREEAM and LEED certified, and across the full range we have a number of certifications including EPDs.
Thank you, Kate. We really are, as you can see and hear, painting a sustainable future. All the information on how we can support you with specifications can be found on our Crown Paints professional website. This includes everything from MBS and BIM specifications to our colour service to CPD materials, as well as all the project possible and environmental credentials. And I thank you.
Thanks very much to the guest speakers. Some absolutely fantastic insights there, and great to see both specifier and manufacturer trying to push boundaries in terms of sustainability. So I'm going to be talking to you now about the MBS Sustainable Futures Report findings. The Sustainable Futures Report 2024 has been launched. It had 568 responses, of which around 2/3 were consultants, architects, designers, specifiers, etc., but also responses from suppliers, clients of infrastructure and buildings as well, and also contractors. Those ranged from sole practitioners right through to your large international organisations. And as a result of that, we'd like to say thank you for all of those that completed the survey, and we have planted 500 trees through Karma. Karma are a UK registered business that support the Green Task Force charity in the UK, and actually plant native species trees around the country, but MBS will be planting trees with those on your behalf. We'd also like to say thank you to everybody that was involved from an organisational level with the survey, the report. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to actually get the amount of responses to give a robust set of data. And all of the brands that you can see on the screen now, we'd particularly like to thank, but especially Glenigan and the Royal Institute of British Architects for their ongoing support with these surveys. If you want to download the report, I'll give you a follow-up where you can find that at the end of the slides, but it's available at thenbs.com. So why did we conduct the 2024 report? Well, this is the fourth Sustainable Futures report that MBS have published over the past 10 years. There was a 5-year gap, roughly, between the first three, but as we can see, the effects of climate change are rapidly increasing. You've only got to look at the images that are on the screen now. May marked the hottest month in a 12-year streak of hottest months, 12-month streak of hottest months, sorry. So basically every month from May backwards over the past year were the hottest on record. Now, that's no coincidence. It's actually climate change, and in particular carbon emissions, that are contributing to the rapid increase in that. This is not something that you now see in the news as being in far-flung corners of the world. It's actually impacting everybody. The image from BBC News on the top there shows some of the flooding that's occurred in the recent months of this year. And for anybody sitting and listening in the UK, you'll be more than aware of how wet and extreme the weather's been, but in tandem, it's also been extremely warm at the same time as well. In terms of construction and the impact on that then, well, construction globally, and the built environment in particular, is responsible for around 40% of carbon emissions. The last IPCC report put it at 39, but it fluctuates a little bit here and there. And in the UK, mainly because of our decarbonisation status and the modernisation of the particular region that we are based, it's responsible for around 25%, but that's still a quarter of all the emissions that are generated through the sectors within the country. We wanted to assess the industry status and their adaptation to change, and we think that's key in making sure that things actually progress and that we can monitor this and provide guidance and education to those that are looking to actually make improvements. So, first stat out of the gate was we asked people what they saw as important in terms of the different aspects of sustainability. Now, we broke this down with it being a construction project focused survey in terms of environmental sustainability, social, and then economic. And unsurprisingly, environmental sustainability has come out on top. It was quite close between the three, but broken down roughly, it's approximately 9 out of 10 see environmental sustainability as most important, whereas 8 out of 10 see social and economic sustainability as more important. That said, obviously any project is funded economically, but I think people are starting to realise that now we really need to focus on the environmental side of things. Social and economics have been something that's been ingrained into developments for a very, very long time now. And so is environmental, really, but it's only just starting to get traction in terms of people understanding it and making a significant change. We then went on to ask people about sustainable outcomes and asked them to rank in order of the different outcomes that they work on from an importance point of view. Now, not surprisingly on this, net zero operational carbon, so when a building's in use, came out top. So that's things like the energy demand and so forth. Good health and well-being, obviously all occupants should be the priority, and we need to make sure that people are healthy, safe, and are in a good place to be. And then sustainable land use and biodiversity came in third. Now, the thing to note there with those top three is those are actually covered by legislation. So Part L of the building regulations in particular focuses on the operational carbon. We've seen reductions from that, from the changes to Part L recently. Good health and well-being is just something that's ingrained. People need to ensure that they are healthy, and there's repercussions there if that isn't the case. And building safety falls into that sort of schema as well. And then sustainable land use and biodiversity. There was actually an introduction at the beginning of the year of the biodiversity net gain law. So businesses now have got to be more mindful when they're conducting construction projects and making sure that they're leaving sites with improved biodiversity from when they started, which then places net zero embodied carbon in fourth. Now, for MBS, as we're seeing focus on specifications, we're actually seeing this as one of the most pressing things that specifiers are asking for. It's been increased day to day, the amount of use of it. The caveat there is that net zero embodied carbon isn't mandated by the government at the moment, whereas the first three are, which would give that a hierarchical rank there by default. Looking further down the list, sustainable communities and social value, life cycle cost being quite important. People sometimes often overlook this, particularly around value engineering. which then feeds into the sustainability cost barriers, which we will come on to in a moment. And sustainable water cycle and sustainable connectivity and transport came in 7th and 8th. Projects with sustainability targets actually have started to increase since the last survey, with roughly 50% now having some sustainability targets. So that's half of most construction projects now will have some sustainability targets, 16% of those all the time, and 33% most of the time. But when that starts to break down to more stringent regimes, so looking for net zero, it drastically reduces. So it's only 14% there. We do see a quarter state that some of them are done some of the time, but it's still got a long way to go in terms of that transition. Using sustainability certification schemas such as BREEAM or LEED or Passive House or any of the other measures that are out there, again, that's still a relatively low uptick, but that's not to say that people aren't doing sustainable outcomes or looking for things. It's just that they aren't applying for that third-party verification to show that the scheme's there. We will cover some of these targets in more breakdown and what they mean later on, and in particular we'll look at how the schemas are ensuring that people are getting better value in terms of the return, particularly with rented premises, so offices, etc., that are being built. And then when we included the taking sustainability measurements while the assets was in use, again, that's sort of, it's a very comfortable 25% there. People are doing that. That said, though, it was the clients that were most likely to say that they report on sustainability metrics, compared with 70% of consultants, so 67% of those being architects. For the clients, obviously, they are operating the buildings typically when they're in use. So if it was a new hospital, it might be the NHS Trust that are then managing that, for example. So the demand that building is taking, the metrics from that are then going to be monitored by the person that's controlling the building. This said, I think with specification, there's a lot that can be learned in terms of understanding how a building actually performs versus what its design intent was. And there could be scope there for more consultants to actually ramp up the metrics. But the larger the organisation, obviously, the more likely they are to measure and report on sustainability. The stats that came back, it was over half of the businesses that say they did were large organisations. Now, resource, funding, availability of time to actually do that is probably the main benefit there for those organisations. But it's something that should be considered, really. We can learn a lot from buildings when they're in use, and the sustainable outcomes could be acted upon then for future projects. Looking at the barriers to sustainability, the cost of achieving sustainability is ranked the highest this time. Now, this is a slight difference from the report that we conducted in 2022, where the lack of client demand came out at the top. This could be an indicator to the current financial status of the industry, with a lot of the international events that have been going on in terms of the wars in Ukraine, Brexit, everything else that's been going on in the news. There's been significant impact on the cost of materials and importing those. So that is likely why this is now showing as the highest ranking subject. Lack of client demand then sits directly underneath. And this is where the client is not dictating that they want sustainable outcomes on their project. There is a piece there where education from the consultants could be updated to actually educate the clients to say that we should be considering this, that or the other, but also what the benefits could be in terms of cost, resale value, leasability, etc. if sustainable outcomes are monitored. So just something to bear in mind. Products being value engineered out, lack of government policy and regulation, and then the other four that were listed underneath there were ranked quite closely together. So against those barriers, who influences sustainable outcomes the most? Well, the client was ranked highest. This was exactly the same as it was in the 2022 report. This year, we offered another option. So we included project financiers in the survey this time. So for example, it might be that the client isn't actually the person funding the financial project. This could be a pension hedge fund, for example, financing a new building that's going to become one of their assets. It could be the government financing something for the NHS. So we wanted to make sure that that split was there to show, but ultimately the people that are controlling the budget or are controlling the building are going to have the most outcome. So that education piece, absolutely imperative there in terms of life cycle analysis and life cycle costing for those two. Then in third was the designers and consultants, obviously the specification, and we just heard from Sidoni from Fosters and Partners previously about how specification should be considered all the way through the specification process, but in particular at the early stages. The designers and the consultants, the specifiers, have a lot of control there in terms of aiding sustainable outcomes. Then contractors, and then suppliers of materials. Now, the suppliers of materials can, by default, improve sustainable outcomes through improving their products, lowering their embodied carbon, making them more energy efficient to operate, etc., etc. But ultimately, they don't influence the decisions that are made necessarily. But there's a lot that they can do in terms of education. So delivering CPDs that showcase how to specify more sustainably, for example, could be a benefit that can be provided there. We then went on to ask people about when sustainability should be considered. So we split this into two. It was when should it ideally be considered and when is it typically considered? And you do see a disconnect. The fact is that the earlier sustainability is considered, the more likely those outcomes are that are going to be achieved. It's not something that can be bolted on. But if we look at the results, most people would say that sustainability is typically considered at the design stage, so 72% there, when ideally 84% are saying it should be considered at the strategy and briefing stage. So against that plan of work, the RIBA plan of work, there should be some slight changes that are being made in-house by practitioners to actually make sure that sustainability is being considered much earlier on. So going on to that early stage process, MBS have actually been doing a few things in terms of trying to aid this. We recently partnered with the BCIS, and in particular through their Built Environment Carbon Database, and we've actually pulled that data into MBS Chorus, our online specification tool. Users can now access different materials and building types to get approximate ideas of what carbon emissions are going to be considered per meter squared or per cost for their projects, or the different materials and things that they're going to be specifying. Now, this is intended to be used early, so it could be the concept stage, it could be at strategy and brief, and it can provide guidance there to actually give a rough idea of what the targets could be. Absolutely fantastic, useful resource. But if you want to know more about that, please drop us a note and we'll get one of the account managers to drop you a line to chat through with you on that. And then going on to early stage descriptive specifications. In the Foster and Partners presentation earlier, we heard about performance-based versus prescriptive. Performance is another term for descriptive specifications, where the user can actually describe the performance requirements of the product, material, system, whatever it is that's being specified. Thinking early on in the stages, this might be the fabric first approach when designing the building, so making sure that the building is as thermally tight and as insulated as possible. Considerations here might be in terms of things like the U value for insulation or fenestration packages, but also when we're looking at decarbonisation, the embodied carbon, so the A1 to A3 stage within an EPD could be stipulated within there. As the project progresses, that will then naturally become more prescriptive, where specific manufacturers and specific products and SKUs, etc., will be specified as that specification develops. We've got an example here of an early stage descriptive spec and what that looks like with an MBS chorus, and you can see that what we're trying to specify here is insulation for a timber frame roof. It's got to meet obviously strict fire performance classifications, but it also has to have a high performance in terms of U value for thermal tightness. But then the specifier here is actually stipulating where the material needs to come from to minimise transportation emissions, the amount of recycled content as a minimum, and then the embodied carbon figures as a maximum. From that then, when this goes to tender and the submittals are made in that sense, the procurement team can actually make sure that they are only obtaining materials that actually meet those performance requirements. As the stages progress then, so again, the technical stage, we're looking at MBS source now. So this is MBS's product library. You can Google this and take a look. It's free to access. But the filters within this, as you can see in the red box on the left-hand side, are completely configurable. So I've actually put search in here for mineral wool slab insulation, and I wanted to filter by certain criteria that met that performance-based spec. So I wanted a manufacturer that has ISO 14001 from an environmental management point of view. I wanted a minimum of 80% recycled content, and I wanted an embodied carbon figure of a maximum of 1.35, and I needed it to be manufactured in the UK. That's then given me back a load of results. So it's narrowed down what would have been hundreds of different materials down to 24, and I can then go through and compare those and make the selection. Once that's decided upon and the specifications progress, this might now be the technical design stage at stage 4 of the plan of work. That product and material is actually available directly with an MBS chorus because the manufacturers hosted their content with an MBS source. And it's just a case of clicking the add to spec button, and then that performance spec can be updated to a prescriptive spec with the relevant criteria met and all of the data compliant with what was described at the beginning. Moving back into the report and sticking with specifications and manufacturers' product data, over 9 out of 10 respondents agreed that specifications are important to achieving sustainable outcomes. We heard that in the earlier presentation as well from Sidoni, where it's absolutely key. It's a contractual document. If things are described in it, it shouldn't be being deviated from, but it also sets out the how-to when people are trying to achieve a certain outcome, whether that's fire safety, sustainability, whatever it is. If that's listed within the spec, there's more success if it is, or the chance of success at least. So absolutely paramount, and we're trying to do as much as we can as a business to actually aid this industry in doing that. That said, another 9 out of 10 agreed that manufacturers need to provide sustainability performance information about the products. We see 46% saying that they're only going to specify or choose a name manufacturer if they've declared better than average sustainability credentials. That's started to increase, so that's now almost half of specifiers will only choose sustainable products and manufacturers that have declared those. And then over half agree that BIM makes it easier to complete sustainability processes. I think this is inherent from the data that's embedded with that, and then some of the automated calculations that you can do within the software, such as Revit, Vectorworks, ArchiCAD, etc. There's a lot of things that can be done there with the BIM models. But sticking with the manufacturer's product information, when we drove deeper into that, we can see that there was a slight disconnect between what's actually published by the manufacturers, the suppliers of the products and materials, and what's actually needed by the users, so the specifiers, architects, contractors, etc. Notably in this, the specifiers had actually stated that they wanted other environmental performance data, so thermal conductivity, energy, etc. This is likely just a miss from the manufacturers there, because most do provide these. It's usually in the product technical data sheets and so forth. But the glaring one that's missing is embodied carbon. Now, the amount of manufacturers that replied obviously didn't see this as a high priority or something that they report on as standard. We are seeing an uptake in this, and people are rapidly increasing. The amount of EPDs that we're now hosting in MBS source is growing day on day. But it's something that is ranked second as the most important by the specifiers. So if you are a manufacturer listening to this, take note. It's something that you really need to be considering to ensure that you're going to continue to be specified moving forward. And then that links nicely into EPDs themselves. So environmental product declarations are split into different stages through the project's life cycle. Embodied carbon sits within A1 to A3, so that's the cradle to gate section. So from materials being dug up out of the ground or being recycled to a finished product at the manufacturer's gate, ready to be dispatched. That's the most important. So if we go back to when we were looking at what were the different areas of sustainability that were ranked most important, within the first section, the top 3 didn't include embodied carbon, but I did alleviate to it that is likely because that is not governed. Now, the great thing here is that this result shows that the practitioners, those on the ground actually doing the design work and specification work, are trying to make a difference themselves, regardless of whether the government have legislated this or not. So embodied carbon, absolutely important to achieving specifications there. We then go into the use stage, construction stages, but then the product material and chemical content. Something else that we actually ask for in MBS sources, any red list materials or declared materials. So this might be things like urea formaldehyde in substrate bonding and so forth. Anything that might be deemed a health hazard or could contribute to poor health is also factored in there, or polluting. It's one of those things that could be a multitude of different options, but it's something that we're covering. But when it comes to actually achieving net zero, so decarbonisation and net zero, yes, they do go hand in hand, but net zero is ultimately the goal. The government set the net zero agenda for 2050. We have seen that reined in slightly under the current government. But there's been a bit of a disconnect between what people were stating they were doing as businesses from our last report and what's actually happening now. This is likely because time generally comes around quicker than you expect it to, but also understanding, people are actually understanding what net zero is more and what is actually required to achieve this. So if we look at the previous results, we've got a comparison here on the chart. In 2021, the survey asked people when they expect to be net zero, and 26% said by 2025. That's now been over halved to 12%. Obviously, that's only next year, and people have not achieved these goals yet, and have obviously identified that they're not going to be doing that. We have seen a slight reduction in all of those. Just a caveat that the figures might not round up on to 100%, particularly that's due to the odd number of respondents and obviously the rounding up that we've had to do there. But I think this just shows a more realistic target. I think the thing that we need to understand, though, is that after 2050 is still a very, very high proportion. And obviously that's when the government targets are, not just in the UK, but in numerous places around the world as well. So businesses need to do more and need to engage with this to actually make sure that this is possible. So linking directly to obviously net zero targets, we wanted to find out a bit more about sustainability and policy, and in particular what the government are doing in terms of aiding sustainable outcomes in the construction sector. So we asked people if they thought the government should support help for existing buildings and infrastructure to be made net zero. And overwhelmingly, it was 88% responded to say that yes, they think they should, with a further 7% saying that they neither disagree or agree with that. But that said, when we look at that in contrast to the built environment becoming more sustainable year on year, it was 67% that have come back and said that they think it will, with 22% saying that they're on the fence. That links directly into the previous one, really. I think without legislation, we're not going to see the decarbonisation that we need. So what is in store for us with the government is yet to be seen, but I think we obviously we need these changes to come, and we know as an industry that they need to come. Okay, so that's a key overview of the summary. If you want to download the report, it's free to download at thembs.com, and there's a lot more insights and stats and figures and background on that, which you can happily read. But yeah, please take a look. I'd just like now to do a wrap up and summary. So I think what we've understood really is that the construction sector's still got a long way to go to decarbonise fully. There are positive changes being made. People are pushing boundaries and seeing things. We heard from Sidoni from Fosters and Partners, who are pushing the LETI guidance in terms of specification and sustainable outcomes there. We also heard from our sponsor, Crown Paints, on what they're doing as a manufacturer to improve sustainable outcomes for their business, but also for wider communities and for their own customers. There's a lot that can be learned, I think, there from the rest of the specification and manufacturing community in terms of those presentations. So thank you very much to those speakers for joining today. Definitely from the report findings, governmental changes must address this more stringently. The agendas at the moment in the legislation or any sort of beneficial aspects to help decarbonise or reuse existing building stock instead of new and so forth aren't going far enough. So we need those changes to happen. Specification is vital in aiding decarbonisation. This is something that I covered myself through the presentation and set the backdrop of what MBS Chorus and Source are doing in comparison to what some of the report findings have found, but also the presentation from Fosters and Partners was specifically on this and how specification is critical and a contractual document which can help the decarbonisation of projects. On that note, sustainability is more achievable if it's considered from the early stages. So instead of it being factored in roughly at the technical design stage, it really needs to be there at the strategy and briefing. So client education and life cycle costing exercises, I think, should be ramped up to help showcase what those are. We are seeing stats, and this is included in the report, but it wasn't something that I touched on today. The use of things like BREEAM, etc., are increasing on things like office projects. So the clients there or the financiers are obviously seeing the value in having that certification or the low energy demand and low embodied carbon buildings in terms of the return on investment they get when it comes to actually leasing these projects out in the in-use phase. So yeah, just something to think about there. Guides such as LETI are providing specifiers with the tools to action. The LETI guidance, again, is free to download, and that was included in the sustainability presentation from Sidoni. And manufacturers themselves are taking note and ramping up their own efforts. There's still a long way to go, I think, in terms of the manufacturing sector, and there are those pushing the boundaries, such as Crown Paints that we've heard from today. But in terms of what the specifiers need, the data that they look for, the Sustainable Futures report has clearly explained what those are and the disconnect there between what manufacturers are currently providing. So if you want to know more, if you are a manufacturer, drop us a note and one of the team will get back to you. We're helping a lot of manufacturers to facilitate best case for specification there at the moment. And yeah, MBS and our tools and research are positioning clients to succeed. So whether you're a specifier, whether you're a supplier of products, we have functionality that can help you. And if you want to know more, just drop us a note. Call to action there. So this is the contact addresses and phone numbers for you, whether you're a specifier or manufacturer. If you just visit the mbs.com, you can actually access both. We've got dedicated page areas for both. Obviously, the tools and functionality and the way in which we can help you differs depending on which one you are, but ultimately, it provides that connection for the two. I've been Lee Jones. Thank you for listening. Thank you again to our guest speakers and to Crown Paints for sponsoring the webinar, and I wish you a pleasant day.